This is Atomic Shinobi and today I am going to narrate what if Naruto sees shattered memory of his future self. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no time, let's start the story.
Yada. A pair of voices sang. A pair of orange figures leapt in celebration as wildlife scattered from the dark clearing. I'm gonna be a genin for sure this time. Next up, Hokage? Datbeo? As Iruka halted his approach on a branch above his most unruly pupil, there was a muted puff, a pained groan, and a heavy thud. When Iruka stooped to the dirt and saw a small bundle of crumpled orange on the ground, the worry that had characterized the previous hour blossomed into panic. While checking the boy's pulse and rolling him onto his back, he couldn't help but look at the big scroll that was half unrolled on the floor beside him. What had happened to Naruto? This was treason, even though he knew the boy would be upset about his failure earlier that day. What was he hoping to acquire? Although weak, the pulse was constant. He had no visible wounds, but the heavy jumpsuit made it impossible to examine him closely. Naruto's face appeared so serene at rest, even though he was undoubtedly unconscious. What was the reason behind his prolonged fear of the boy? Although it was reasonable to be afraid of the Kyuubi that was sealed inside of him, the boy was resolute and sincere. He couldn't see him as someone who would seek retribution and turn into a monster against those who had wronged him. It appeared that the late Hokage's judgment was sound, but how the Yondaime knew that Naruto would be strong enough to contain the beast he'd never met. His legend deserves yet another accolade. He was reassured by the silent rise of Naruto's chest, but he was still baffled by why Naruto had taken a forbidden scroll. Naruto's stomach clenched, and a drop of blood seemed to fall out of his ear. Iruka's chakra sensing was still strong, even though years of teaching at the academy had dulled some of his instincts. He was alert when another chakra signature appeared from the same direction he had come from. He supposed he'd never had that kind of luck, but perhaps a little more time would have allowed him to realize what was actually happening before anyone arrived to take the boy into custody. Was that Mizuki, I wonder? 3 kunai tore through the air toward him, and the only warning he heard was a faint whistling sound. His instinct told him to jump out of the way, but he soon understood that if he didn't stop them, Naruto would be struck by the kunai. He had never made a choice so simple. It felt as though someone had trained taijutsu on his head. As his consciousness acclimatized to the surroundings, a low moan escaped. The blinding light made him quickly close his eyes, as if opening them had been an error. Where had he gone? The lumpy mattress he was so accustomed to didn't feel like this one. Before he could properly keep his eyes open, a door opened and closed again. It was a friendly, businesslike voice asking, Uzumaki-san, how are you feeling? Man, oh man. Aren't I in the hospital? The hospital was something he detested. Nevertheless, rather than merely wishing he were somewhere else, he made an effort to open his eyes once more. He reached up to stroke his eyelids, but his hand stopped suddenly just a few inches from the mattress. With the right motivation, the sliver of his vision gradually expanded as he made conscious efforts. His interrogator was a blur of pink, and for a moment he wondered what it would be like to be blind. Naruto's gaze shifted to his surroundings, and he noticed wooden cuffs fastening his wrists to the bed frame. Were they expecting him to try to flee? Indeed. He detested the hospital, but, well, perhaps he would have fled. Nevertheless, this seemed excessive. The nurse cleared her throat to attract the boy's attention after patiently waiting for him to orient himself. Naruto gently pressed against the cuffs to test their strength, saying, I'm fine. Wait, no, my head hurts really bad. What happened? They appeared substantial but not indestructible. The nurse made a note on a clipboard and walked out of the room without seeming to appreciate his efforts, until the door cracked again. The only sound in the room was the twisting of skin against wood. This time, Naruto stopped struggling when a familiar presence entered the room. Naruto managed to look a little shocked at the last part, but the Hiruzen Sarutobi took his pipe in his hand and shook his head solemnly. Gigi, what's going on? Why am I tied to the bed? Did they think I was gonna escape? Again? Naruto said. He usually liked the boy's antics, but this was a serious situation. Naruto, can you tell me what happened yesterday? Naruto's eyes widened after he briefly furrowed his forehead. Oh, I got the scroll just like Mizuki. Sensei told me, but I guess I passed out. Did I pass the test? Sarutobi gazed at the boy and took a few puffs from his pipe. And what did Mizuki tell you? Naruto smiled at the elderly man as though his wrists were still tied to the bed. Oh, since I didn't pass the main graduation test, he said I could take the applied exam. All I had to do was steal that scroll from your house. He didn't tell me you'd be guarding it, but I can handle anything. Datbeo, Naruto said. With a sly smile, Hiruzen reflected on how soothing it was to act as though this conversation was identical to the numerous others they had had. Naruto, I'm going to have to ask for specifics. Think of it like a mission debriefing. You never know what details will turn out to be important. What happened that night? Naruto's expression changed to one that was obviously intended to appear solemn and businesslike. It required effort. Let's see. Okay, so sneaking where no one's supposed to be is easiest at night, right? So I waited until most people were in bed and crawled up the drain pipe to get into the window on the 3rd floor. The one by the bathroom. Mizuki. Sensei said that the scroll would be in the library. 2nd door on the left. So as I crept down the hall, that's when you ambushed me from the bathroom. Naruto didn't notice the Hokage's grimace. So I used my awesome ninjutsu skills to defeat you, grab the scroll and escape like the wind. Mizuki. Sensei told me to head out into the woods and evade capture long enough to learn a technique from the scroll. This caused Hiruzen to narrow his eyes. The first one in the scroll was the Shadow Clone Jutsu. I never figured out how to do the one from the academy, so I was about to skip it, but I thought maybe this one would be easier. And it was. It took me most of the morning, but I got it. I made a shadow clone. Then the clone popped and, I guess the next thing I remember is waking up here. His face dropped unexpectedly. Does that mean I was captured after all? Did I fail again? But I learned a technique? As he thought about the implications, Hiruzen nearly missed the question. Everything was coming together. Naruto's eyes widened as he said, Naruto-kun, you've been unconscious for 6 days. The Sandaime Hokage took a moment to process the statement. The scroll you stole was a scroll of seals that was restricted by the Nidaime Hokage because the techniques were dangerous. Wait, so that wasn't a scroll I was supposed to steal? I'm sorry to tell you, Naruto-kun, there was no second test. Mizuki asked you to steal that scroll for real. Naruto had conflicted and wide eyes. Sadness upon discovering that he was still not a ninja. Mizuki's deception angered him. Terrified upon discovering that he was a thief, whether deceived or not. When the boys' gaze returned to the handcuffs around his wrists, they realized they were terrified he would break out of the hospital. I didn't mean to do anything wrong, Gigi. I swear. The loudmouth's fierce voice had vanished. Naruto's eyes were filled with tears, and his voice abruptly became strained. I know, Naruto-kun, it was Mizuki who did a bad thing. I just wanted to make sure you gave me the whole story. Hiruzen raised his hand. With a white porcelain mask that vaguely resembled a cat covering everything but short, unremarkable brown hair, an Anbu agent emerged from the shadows. Before melting back into the shadows, the man made a series of hand seals, causing the wooden cuffs to open and drop to the linoleum floor. Now, Naruto, about the Shadow Clone Jutsu. I don't want you using it again. The techniques in that scroll were restricted for a reason. It's possible that that technique is responsible for putting you in the hospital for so long, and I want to make sure before we risk it happening again. Alright? Naruto nodded while sniffing. Hiruzen turned back to the door and asked, Kaori? The nurse who had previously fought Naruto's tears into a pink blur returned and stood at attention. Take good care of our Naruto-kun here. He's had a tough week. The Sandaime Hokage of Konohagakure, Hiruzen Sarutobi, had never felt older. As his former teammates, Kaharu Utatane and Homura Mitokado, sat across from him silently, he took his seat. Leaning back, Hiruzen puffed on his pipe again before carefully placing it in its holder. Thoughts? Kaharu began slowly, carefully considering each word. The boy shows poor critical thinking skills, but so do many of the academy students during peacetime. That will have to trained out of him, sooner rather than later. How about remedial training? Send him back to the academy with a focused curriculum. She took a moment to alter the tone of the conversation. The flat expression on her face concealed the remark, but Hiruzen sensed it. Of course, this time, his instructors will have to be more thoroughly vetted. He had pushed for the boy to have as normal a childhood as possible and almost brought them all to ruin. To shift the topic, Homura cleared his throat. Speaking of which, what of Mizuki and the scroll? The cat Anbu responded by coming out of the office corner and standing alertly. Vanished. Anbu reported the trail went cold 8 miles north of the village. The trackers are certain he had assistance. So Mizuki has defected. Probably gave them the scroll as payment. He had minimal damaging intelligence or tactical value, so the scroll appears to be the primary loss. Hiruzen replied, while not nothing, I'm not overly concerned about the scroll. If I were, it wouldn't have been so simply to steal. Many of the techniques inside were half-finished or suicidal to try. Tobarama Sensei created many such techniques. I had it in my home in order to study a sealing array that I had hoped would lead to a tighter personal security seal. In fact, it may prove beneficial in determining where the scroll ended up. Tenzo, brief Anbu regarding inspecting foreign seals for signature elements of the Nidaim's sealing style. Anbu, the cat, nodded and disappeared in a flickering. Homura gave his old friend a raised eyebrow. If Mizuki is a minor security breach and the scroll is not critical, why are you so concerned? Before its owner noticed the movement, a withered hand drifted in the direction of the smoking pipe. The Hokage let out a sigh. Naruto-kun is the concern. He'll get over Mizuki, but I don't know if he'll get over Iruka. After a long silence, Kaharu broke the silence. Iruka Amino. The Chunin instructor who was killed trying to stop the traitor. I was under the impression that he was unpopular with the academy teachers due to his incessant pranks. I wouldn't be worried about it being his first exposure to death. If what you said is true, he didn't even see the body. In response, Hiruzen shook his head. Iruka and Naruto had recently grown especially close. He was responsible for a considerable improvement in the boy's attitude, and I'm afraid his death could shake the boy to his core. While Naruto-kun is an exceptional child whose loyalty is not doubted, it is generally a bad idea to play around with a Jinchuriki's emotional state. The two counselors reclined in their seats, thinking. Kaharu was the first to speak. You haven't told him, I assume? Hiruzen shook his head. Then give him distractions. As long as he has something to apply himself towards, he should be able to absorb it. His grades may have been poor, but he was still trained to be a ninja. She exhaled slowly. I don't need to tell you that having a compromised Jinchuriki is unacceptable. Iwa and Kumo each have two fully trained Jinchuriki and no fondness for us. Leaning forward, Homura placed a delicate hand on the desk. The old man's expression was tense, and Hiruzen had to remind himself that Homura also had grandchildren enrolled in the academy. Do not send him back to the academy. I know how strongly you feel about this, but give him a tutor. Apprentice him. Don't send him back to a classroom. Even if it didn't result in a full outbreak, it would put the other children in danger. The advice was sound. It's also most likely best for Naruto. Look into suitable tutors. I'll tell him everything in the morning. He and I are alike. Naruto looked at Haku incomprehensibly and said, Naruto-kun, please, kill me. Naruto gritted his teeth and said, please hurry up and kill me. How could someone like him have such a strong desire to die? Why are you hesitating? Haku didn't answer. I don't understand. Is being strong the only reason for you to be alive? Something other than fighting. You could have been acknowledged for something else, Naruto went on. Though he was unable to express it, he knew what Haku must be feeling. He thought he was too foolish to help him. The day I met you in the forest, I thought you were like me. You should be able to understand. I'm sorry that you will have to stain your hands. Nothing in Naruto could make his muscles relax, but his teeth were clenched so tightly that they felt like they might break. Is this the only way? He asked. Yes, the isolation. The hopelessness. Death is not the worst thing in the world. Could he help Haku with this? Put an end to his suffering? He was at a loss for what to say in response, but it didn't feel right. Haku had such a strong conviction. Perhaps he was correct. Automatically, his hand reached into his kunai pouch and pulled out a kunai. Please, fulfill your own dreams. Naruto couldn't resist taking a quick look at Sasuke's body at that point. Sasuke also had a dream. He looked at Haku, but his mind was on Sasuke. His heart had to be hardened. Naruto pulled himself together and leapt forward, racing in the direction of his opponent. If we'd met under different circumstances, we might have become friends. His new companion. That he intended to murder. Thank you. Haku's hand suddenly reached up and grabbed Naruto's wrist, twisting the thrust to the side as he pushed forward. After saying, sorry, Naruto-kun. I can't die yet. Haku abruptly vanished. He heard a loud chirping sound, but it vanished as quickly as Naruto's words, as he lay in the hospital bed, panting and sweating. He noticed his hands were clean when he looked down at them. His face felt smooth to the touch. No bruises, no scratches. What was that? Was that a dream? It was the most vivid dream he had ever experienced. And he recalled everything. Even though the information seemed just out of his grasp, he felt as though he knew what would happen next. Sasuke. Haku. A bridge. To calm the stampede in his chest, he inhaled deeply. He recalled making the decision to murder the stranger. Were similar dreams experienced by others? Was it a dream? Good morning, Naruto-kun. At the ceiling, Naruto blinked. He couldn't recall going back to sleep the night before. He had been experiencing severe heart palpitations. It had felt like a real dream. It was still authentic. It was the most unusual dream he had ever had. Naruto began, "How did you sleep?" and raised his head to see the Hokage's face shielding the window from the sun with the brim of his ceremonial hat. Gigi would probably know what to do. Naruto's forehead furrowed as he searched for the right words to describe his experience. I guess. I had a really weird dream though. I dreamed that I was on a bridge in the land of waves. A big one. And I was a ninja. Like, I had my hite and everything, and I was on a team with Sakura, Chan and Sasuke, Teme, and this guy, Kakashi. Sensei. We were fighting these really tough ninja, and this one that used ice jutsu killed Sasuke, but not really. And he asked me to kill him, but then he ran away and Kakashi Sensei ran his hand right through him. It felt really real. For a moment, Hiruzen gazed at the boy. Was he aware of the group tasks? How could Naruto have known Sakura and Sasuke were on the same team under Kakashi when he had been unconscious in the hospital until yesterday? That does sound interesting, Naruto.kun. I understand that the medics found nothing wrong physically with you, but perhaps a meeting with someone who better understands psychological issues would be in order. Naruto returned the gaze. Maybe you should talk to someone who knows how to help you get better from having your mind messed up. The boy nodded and smiled broadly in embarrassment as understanding dawned on his face. Well, we could deal with that later. This wasn't exactly how he wanted the conversation to proceed. Naruto.kun, I'm afraid I have some bad news. After giving a curious tilt to his head, Naruto's eyes widened. Wait, I still get to try the test again, right? I know it was my third try, but I thought. To keep the boy from veering too far off course, Hiruzen gently raised a hand. Hiruzen persisted despite Naruto's nervous appearance. Don't worry. You will have other opportunities even though you haven't graduated this time. No, I'm afraid this news will be more difficult for you. Iruka Amino is dead. Naruto's mouth fell open. Dead? What? How? Hiruzen went on with a quiet, melancholy sigh. The night of graduation test, we believe Iruka was that first one to find you with the scroll. Apparently you were already unconscious at this point. Mizuki arrived next and they fought. Iruka was killed defending you from him. At that point, it appears that Mizuki arranged the scene for it to look like you had killed your sensei. Naruto sat up at this point. He was unable to remain silent any longer. I would never hurt Iruka. Sensei. He would have been standing on the bed in his agitation if the sheets hadn't been tucked in so tightly. Hiruzen gently raised his hand once more to inform Naruto that nobody shared this opinion. I know that, Naruto.kun, but the first responders didn't. As they secured the scene, Mizuki managed to escape the village with the scroll. By the time someone who was similarly aware of the situation arrived, it was too late. Naruto's face erupted in rage. The Hokage's senses were pricked by a hint of malevolent chakra. Hiruzen watched the scene unfold, curious to see how Naruto would react to this information. The anger gradually subsided as the grief took its place. Iruka had truly vanished. Naruto appeared ready to speak, but he closed his mouth and collapsed onto his pillow, gazing up at the ceiling as though he were forcing himself to wake up. With a sigh, Hiruzen gave the boy a shoulder pat. The elderly man turned and quietly walked out of the room, saying, I'll give you some time, Naruto.kun, but I'll be back if you want to talk about it. In the hospital hallway, Inoichi Yamanaka bowed to the Hokage, saying, Hokage. Sama. At a nod from his leader, the Anbu who had escorted the retired Junin quickly departed. You summoned me? Inoichi glanced at the room the Hokage had just left and said, Yes, Inoichi-san. I have a delicate matter for you to attend to. The bright white ceiling would not ignite no matter how hard he stared at it. I feel sorry. Rolling onto his side, Naruto peered out the window. Sky that is a vivid shade of blue. For some reason, that offended him. Iruka. Sensei had passed away. Due to him. Why did Mizuki murder Iruka rather than him? Behind his eyes, a pain blossomed. In an attempt to lessen the pain, Naruto pressed the heels of his hands against them, but the pain persisted until it eventually disappeared like a candle in the wind. Today, everyone wore black. Even Lee and Guy. Naruto went where he always went when he felt this way because he didn't know what to do with himself after the funeral service. Naruto entered the Ichiraku ramen stand, parted the curtains, and sat down at the counter. He liked how sensitive Tuchi and Ayame were, even though it seemed strange to see them dressed differently than their typical white cooking smocks. He grinned appreciatively as a bowl of pork miso ramen was brought to him without a word. With a feeble smile, Ayame returned his attention to the stove. Shortly after he dipped his chopsticks into the briny broth, the curtains behind him opened, and a heavy figure sat down at the counter beside him. How are you doing, Naruto.kun? Naruto raised his head from his bowl of ramen. It wasn't a problem to let it sit for a moment because he wasn't even particularly hungry. Iruka nodded and silently gave Naruto the same command. Hey, Iruka. Sensei. I'm doing fine. Konohamaru took it worse. Still, I'm really going to miss Gigi. We're all going to miss him. He was a great leader, and I don't envy whoever has to fill his shoes. With a slight smile, Naruto returned his attention to his ramen. He wasn't sure now, but normally he would have been all over that opening. He wasn't sure he was ready to accept the hat just yet. By the way, your ramen is on me today. What? Gaped Naruto. Well, it's only fair. We've all been so busy since the invasion, but gambling debts are not so easily forgotten. Naruto appeared even more perplexed than previously. Iruka rubbed the back of his neck and smiled. You see, I might have placed a wager on your fight in the Chunin exam finals. The tournament may have been interrupted, but you won that fight fair and square. With the odds that we're paying, I made out pretty well. Tucci leaned conspiratorially over the counter and laughed as Naruto kept staring. Then Naruto joined in the laughter, and Ayame watched with a satisfied smile as the three men enjoyed each other's company. Well then, I suppose the second bowl will have to be on the house. You weren't the only one who made out pretty well from that fight. As the moment went by, Iruka put a hand on Naruto's back and reverted to her solemn expression. Naruto gave him a smile and gave the question a nod. He would be all right. Daring him to blink first, the white ceiling stared back at him. One more dream? He wasn't even asleep, though. Was Mizuki tampering with his mind? Naruto snarled. After killing Iruka. Sensei, that jerk got away with it. As he considered the injustice, a strong desire flushed his system. It was incorrect. Before he knew it, he was sitting on his hospital room's windowsill. He leapt out without hesitation at all. The window was open, and the breeze blew through the curtains. Inoichi poked his head in to see the room was empty when the door cracked open. As Naruto skipped across the rooftop, dust began to kick up. He didn't really have a plan, but he didn't see the point in waiting because a journey always begins with the first step. Right now, at least, he knew where he was going. His equipment was resting on his apartment couch. He could decide what to do next once he had it. As the cat, masked Anbu materialized in front of him, he was forced to skid to a stop after landing lightly on the next rooftop. Naruto Uzumaki. I'm here to escort you back to the hospital until you are cleared to leave. The boy snarled. Tears welled up at the corner of his eye, but he refused to let them stop him either. Mizuki killed Iruka. Sensei. I have to find him. He did it because of me, he exclaimed. A hand clamped down on Naruto's shoulder as he was about to jump to another rooftop to circumnavigate the Anbu. Out of sheer instinct, Naruto grabbed the offending hand before swerving and ducking beneath the arm. After using his leg to block Naruto's pivot and releasing his arm, the Anbu leapt back to reevaluate. In a puff of smoke, Naruto swiftly formed his hands into a familiar hand seal and produced a shadow clone. He extended his hand behind him and directed chakra toward it. As a spinning ball of energy materialized in his hand, the Anbu leapt back once more to make more room. Naruto's awareness of the situation returned as his assailant moved away and his adrenaline was running low. He turned and gazed in astonishment at the ball of energy in his hand for a brief moment before the ball exploded due to his lack of focus. That ceiling was something he detested. He wagered that if ceilings were capable of feeling, it would be reciprocal. He had a problem. Even though he was aware that he wasn't the sharpest kunai in the holster, using skills he had never learned was far more important than daydreaming. He didn't know what was wrong, but something was wrong. His nurse, Kaori, was taking a blood sample when he woke up not long ago. Since he was fairly certain that the diagnosis was hit by exploding ball of energy, he wasn't entirely sure what the point of that was. To be honest, he thought it was a good idea to bring back the wooden cuffs. He wasn't bothered by the intense rage he had previously experienced, but it was unsettling to realize that there was something in your head that shouldn't be there. I apologize for what happened earlier, Anbu-san. Naruto thought the man in the cat mask was still in his room. Even after he attacked him, he most likely brought him back. Kaori shrugged as she took some notes, looking up from her clipboard at the boy and then over her shoulder to the seemingly empty room. Kaori left Naruto in silence after a few minutes of scribbling and silence. The silent treatment always bothered him, even though he wasn't exactly in the best of form to start. Naruto wanted to create noise to erase the ceiling's fictitious smile because it appeared to enjoy the quiet. The door cracked open again before he could follow his somewhat insane impulse. When Inoichi Yamanaka pulled a chair against the wall to Naruto's bedside, she said, "Oh good, you're here this time. How was your breath of fresh air?" and sat down comfortably. He had managed to go across the whole room without the anxious Jinchuriki reacting defensively. Leaning back, he spoke to the boy. Naruto felt as though he knew the man, but he was unable to determine how. "My name is Inoichi Yamanaka. Now, I've heard a number of things about you since the incident last week, and I'm here to find out what's actually going on. Do you think you can help me with that, Naruto-san? Perhaps he was Ino's relative? Naruto smiled broadly at the man, but it appeared that he saw right through it. Sure. What do you want to know? Naruto asked. Why don't you tell me about the dream you had last night? Sure, and then I could tell you about the other one I had before I left the hospital this morning? Inoichi merely hesitated a fraction. You had another? Were you asleep when it happened? Not this time. I was wide awake, and then I just sort of saw it. All at once, or did it happen over time? Naruto's forehead furrowed. He hadn't given it much thought. I'm not sure. Gigi walked out and then it happened. When it was over, that's when I left. Inoichi gave a contemplative nod. Why don't you tell me about how about we call them visions? Naruto nodded even though he wasn't sure he liked the way that word sounded. Well, in the first one I was on a bridge in the land of waves. I graduated and was with my team, Kakashi, Sensei, Sakura, Chan and Sasuke, Teme. We were protecting the guy building the bridge from these really powerful missing nin, Zabuza and Haku. After I beat Haku, he asked me to kill him. Then he ran away to protect Zabuza and Kakashi. Sensei killed him. I'll admit that I heard how you described the same vision this morning, and you seem to have added some details. Did you forget to mention them earlier? No, it's more like I remember more things about what happened now. I remember that there was this bad guy named Gato. He was a real creep. He betrayed Zabuza and Haku, but Zabuza killed him before he died. Inoichi nodded slowly, absorbing all the information the boy had shared. Alright, and what about the more recent vision? For a brief moment, Naruto became excited as he considered how Teuchi and Iruka had placed bets on him, but his expression dimmed when he recalled the other details. He couldn't help but feel anxious when he said, so we were all wearing black. Who's we? Iruka, Sensei and me, and Teuchi-san and Ayame. Nichan. We were eating at Ichiraku Ramen. It was after the Chunin exam, and Iruka, Sensei and Teuchi-san had bet that I would win my fight against Neji in the finals. And since I won, they paid for my ramen. It was great. And why were you all wearing black? Naruto appeared to have wished he could bypass that section. To avoid giving the impression that he wanted something negative to happen to his Gigi, Naruto winced when he said, we just got back from Gigi's funeral. After a moment of processing that, Inoichi cleared his throat and nodded blankly. Naruto-san, how did the Hokage die? With a puzzled expression, Naruto closed his mouth as if he were about to speak. Inoichi's face remained unwavering despite his slight paleness. I think I knew, but even in the dream, vision, I didn't know much. A lot of people died during the invasion. The idea made Naruto's throat tighten. I thought Orochimaru did it. Everyone was talking about him afterward. I think Orochimaru killed Gigi. He didn't want to cry, but there was a glimmer in his eye. I thought Gigi was still alive. Iruka. Sensei is dead, but Gigi is still alive. Inoichi gave a slow nod. Alright, I'll tell you what, Naruto-san. Why don't you get some rest and we can pick this up again later? A tear ran down Naruto's cheek as he nodded. As the boy departed, Inoichi reassured him, you're doing fine. I'll see you again in a few hours. He didn't agree with the majority of seasoned veterans who believed that the younger ones becoming a little tougher was a good thing. He was aware of the psychological effects of these encounters. Additionally, it causes more harm the younger they are. Take a peek at the Uchiha child. As he shut the door between them, he turned to see Naruto gazing out the window. The evening was approaching. The sun is just beginning to drop below the horizon. Ninjas still have plenty of time in the day to practice their craft. In the Hokage's office, Inoichi Yamanaka was standing across from Hiruzen Sarutobi, who was seated. They're not dreams and they're not delusions. It's not just that he's learning new things through them, but that some of them are things he shouldn't know. Some things are also provably false. His first vision showed him on Team 7. His second vision showed him Iruka Yumino alive. However, other parts were uncanny. He mentioned a Gato in the land of waves. I'm assuming that's a reference to the Gato company. He mentioned a missing nin named Zabuza. He has some familiarity with the structure of the Chunin exams. I didn't want to press him for too many details, too soon, but I suspect further inquiry would yield similar irregularities. Hiruzen smoked his pipe while leaning back in his chair. Do you suspect external manipulation? Inoichi thought about that for a long time. I am not sure, Hokage. Sama. The kind of visions he's describing don't have a tactical value that I can see. His mention of Zabuza suggested he was an enemy. His second vision included periphery knowledge of you dying at the hands of Orochimaru during an invasion of the village. If someone is trying to sway his loyalties, I don't see how. If anything, the visions include comradeship with our own forces. And internal manipulation. Again, I don't see the game. It's hard to fathom what a massive chakra construct would want, but freedom or violence are probably high on the list. There doesn't appear to be a push in either of those directions as of yet. He reacted strongly to dwelling on the vision containing your death, but as you're still alive, I don't see how something like that would be meant to compromise him. The Hokage gazed out the window and gave an absent nod. I'll need more to reach a viable conclusion. If you were to perform a mind walk on Naruto, could you determine what the visions are and where they come from? Inoichi went pale. He opened up. I believe so. There can be complications walking through the mind of a Jinchuriki. It can be hazardous to the mind walker. Hiruzen gave a nod. Do you have a recommendation for lead interrogator? Inoichi's eyes were closed. His shoulders began to relax slowly. I will handle it, Hokage. Sama. When Kaori finished her rounds, she walked down the hall. 20 sample vials, all but one empty, were on a tray in her hand. By the end of the day, the lobby was largely deserted. She put the tray down and walked over to the check.in desk. She passed out abruptly and bumped into one of her classmates. A number of employees rushed to assist her in standing up. She put a hand to her forehead and slowly nodded, asking, Kaori-san, are you okay? I don't know what happened. Maybe I should sit down for a bit. A medic.nin approached and gave her a cautious look. Have one of the staff escort you to one of the empty rooms. We can't have our staff overworked under non-emergency conditions. Get some rest. Kaori replied with a weak nod. A male nurse noticed the tray of sample containers as Kaori was leaving the lobby. Does anyone know where these were supposed to go? The desk nurse took a quick look. Nope, what's there? He counted quickly. Looks like 19 empty sample vials. Inoichi made himself calm down. Naruto.kun. The technique I'm going to use is called mind walking. It will allow me to enter a manifestation of your brain called a Mindscape. Once there I would investigate the source of these visions. Naruto blinked. Was I supposed to understand that? I suppose not. What you need to know is two things. The first is that while I'm in there, your mind may try to fight against me to protect your thoughts and memories. Your willful cooperation would make this a lot easier. Can you do that for me? Sure, I can do that. Inoichi-san. Inoichi couldn't help but smile at the boy's excitement. Good. Inoichi paused, but Naruto didn't seem to want to interrupt. The second thing is more complicated. Hokage. Sama agreed to let me inform you so that we'd be on the same page. 12 years ago, the Kyuubi no Kitsune attacked the village. Oh, you mean the giant fox sealed in my belly? For an instant the Junin could not speak. Yes, how did you learn about it? Naruto appeared to be about to begin a story when he paused, seemingly uncertain of where to begin. Inoichi didn't seem impressed and said, I don't know. No, I'm serious, I know, but I don't really know how I know. Kind of like some of the stuff from my visions. Like when I knew I was in the land of waves. The man's shoulders stiffened in spite of himself as he asked, and, how do you feel about the fox? He's a bastard, complained Naruto. Some of the tension escaped, and Inoichi laughed. Okay, I think that's something we can agree on. Do you feel comfortable getting started? He said, gathering himself. Without a second thought, Naruto agreed. Some things had to be experienced in order to be fully understood, but Inoichi had a suspicion the boy didn't fully grasp. The Junin stood beside the bed, pushing his chair aside. He closed his eyes and laid the palm of his hand lightly on the boy's head. Naruto's eyes briefly closed due to a warm, nearly burning sensation on his scalp, but he was startled to discover that he was standing in a partially flooded, dark hallway. Inoichi appeared beside him in an instant. The man looked around, which made Naruto a little uncomfortable. The lengthy hallway had open doorways on both sides and concrete walls. From one end to the other, pipes of various sizes extended across the walls and ceiling. Even though it was too dark to see the details, the visibility was incredibly useful because it was difficult to determine where the light was coming from. Leaking from the pipes above, water lapped at his ankles. There was more detail than he had anticipated because there were no visible light sources nearby, but the light was too dim to see much. As a deep growl reverberated through the hallway, Inoichi dropped into a defensive position. Naruto could tell which way the noise was coming from despite it bouncing off the concrete walls. Before a hand clamped down on his shoulder to stop him, he began to move toward the opening that led to the source. Naruto hardly flinched at the Junin's touch, much more numb than the last time that had occurred. In the hallway, the man's voice sounded odd. Naruto.kun, is that the direction of the Kyuubi? Nearly muffled. A drop of perspiration trickled down the man's stern face. Inoichi let go and nodded in response to Naruto's stupid nod. Naruto wasn't as terrified of the beast as he believed he should be for an unknown reason. He had a dim memory of the tall beast snatching its claws at him through a cage door's bars. He should have been frightened, but instead he felt depressed. It goes without saying that he believed his guest didn't want to hear that information at that particular time. The two proceeded down the narrower corridor until they reached a spacious, deserted room. Naruto was undoubtedly impressed since it was the first time he had truly seen the steel gates that kept the nine-tailed fox in check. They were at least a dozen stories high and continued to rise. Beyond the bars was darkness, but the markings on the door frame gave the entire building an air of age and significance. He might question whether the fox was there at all if it weren't for the feeling of heat emanating from the opposite side. Both ninja flinched as two red eyes opened from the opposite side and stared straight at them as another deep growl reverberated through the chamber. My jailer comes with a chaperone. Afraid I'll reach through these bars and eat the boy? Inoichi appeared unsure of what to do. Despite his empathy, Naruto took the initiative. Give it up, stupid fox. We're not here for you. Ah, you're here because your fragile mind nearly broke itself to pieces. Then why are you bothering me? Well, because you live here. Maybe you know why it happened. Gwahahaha. And why would I help? Go, look for yourself and leave me be. The area behind the bars was once again enveloped in darkness as the great red eyes closed. A small portion of the tension left Inoichi's body, and he shivered and breathed. When the village was attacked by the fox 12 years ago, Naruto suddenly realized that Inoichi was a ninja. When the creature wasn't so restrained, he had battled it behind bars. Naruto shivered at the thought. Inoichi motioned them to go back the way they had come. Naruto listened as Inoichi held out a hand to stop him as they returned to the main corridor. They had never heard the sound before, but it was the fox's growl. Not the water trickling from pipes above, but what sounded like a waterfall in the distance. The noise led them to a dead end at the end of the corridor and down another branching hallway. Concrete pieces were piled on top of one another in the hallway, giving the impression that it had collapsed. Water poured into the pool on the floor in streams through the crevices. Inoichi knelt beside the obstruction and reached a softly glowing hand down to the debris. I will have to delve deeper, but I believe we've found the damage. Naruto went pale when he thought, wait, so this is my brain, right? So part of my brain collapsed? Inoichi held his hand outstretched and shook his head. He looked at Naruto to make sure he was at least mostly following, and received a hesitant nod in response. Not precisely. This whole place is simply how your mind interprets what's going on inside your head. The seal that cages the Kyuubi isn't really a gate of steel bars, but it is an apt representation. After all, your subconscious understands you better than is possible in your conscious mind. This cave-in represents a blockage in your mind. There is something behind this rubble that either caused this damage or motivated your brain to cause this damage to protect the rest of you. Inoichi looked back at the debris, his eyes narrowing. I think I'm getting a better picture of how your mind works. The water is your thoughts, your memories. Everyone's a little different, but this isn't an uncommon representation. It tends to indicate a rapid thought process. It's all over the floor, which would seem to suggest you're rather careless about ordering your thoughts, but that will come with maturity. The water leaking in through the blockage appear to be memories, but they're slightly different than the water on the ground. So slight, that they are either more of your memories or a fantastic facsimile. Facsimile. A copy. Genjutsu. The idea behind genjutsu is to suggest new inputs to the brain. The closer you can get to what the person's actual thoughts look like, the more believable it is. There are certain types of genjutsu that are a little less discriminatory, but memory implants are some of the most complex. If they're too different, they're easily dismissed, like a dream. The visions you've been having, however, have been experienced like a dream, but you recognize that they weren't. Now I can see why. Very similar. I wish Iruka Sensei taught like. Naruto halted at a sudden clenching of his throat and turned to face his feet. This is much more interesting than classes. Inoichi shifted the topic, not wanting to be distracted while in the midst of a mindwalk. Naruto.kun, there's another stage to what I'm doing here. So far we've been taking in the landscape, but I'm going to need to investigate these thoughts directly so I can attempt to discover their source. I'm asking because walking through memories can seem very invasive. I may see things you don't want someone to see, but I'm doing it for your own good. What do you say? Naruto continued to gaze at his feet. He cleared his throat with a cough. Yeah, go ahead. With a nod, Inoichi shifted his hand to stop one of the water streams. Suddenly, a haze of colors surrounded the two as they stood. Inoichi placed a hand on Naruto's shoulder to help him stay upright when he started to feel unsteady. 3 figures jumped from rooftop to rooftop against the ancient looking castle walls as the colors began to settle. Up ahead, there was a loud crash, but the scenery slid past them without either Naruto or Inoichi moving. The 3 figures leapt high and smashed into a brawl between 3 more figures, though one of them seemed to be standing off to the side. Naruto saw himself and 2 women, one with a huge chest, a big man with long white hair, and a pig on his shoulder as the dust settled. Kabuto-san. The real Naruto's face showed his surprise. He couldn't place the older boy, but he looked familiar. The older boy retaliated by cutting his own wrist and splattering the blonde with his blood as she abruptly shoved the big man aside and charged Kabuto. When the maneuver appeared to have been successful, the shock of it persisted. Kabuto gave the woman a haymaker as she froze to stare at the blood, sending her flying back toward the black-haired woman and Naruto. Hey, what the heck's going on? Why is Kabuto fighting Tsunade? Both Naruto's eyes narrowed dangerously at the boy with the bespectacled glasses, saying, "You are so thick, Naruto-kun. That's why you can't compare to Sasuke-kun." The big man was bending over. "Jiraiya. That's all. Look at his headband carefully. He is Orochimaru's subordinate." The real Naruto appeared to lose some of his confidence at that, but the other one just glared more. "That's right, I'm a Sound Village spy. And you know what, Naruto-kun? I have concluded something from your data. Unlike Sasuke-kun, you have no talent in becoming a shinobi." Kabuto went on, "Even if you make such a scary face, you are nothing more than an out of place genin. You were relying on that monster inside of you. But with the 3 Sannin in front of my eyes, you are worthless. You are like a small bug right now. If you try something, I'll kill you." Naruto created 3 shadow clones as he charged after Kabuto after the goading was successful. But as the 4 genin in orange encircled him, a splatter of blood escaped and struck the original in the eyes. All 4 were easily dispatched by Kabuto, and the original was sent flying back to be captured by Shizune, who spat a number of needles at the unsteady spy. He was only able to deflect them with his headband, though, even if he was unable to dodge out of the way. Jiraiya instructed Shizune to take care of Kabuto while he dealt with Orochimaru as they regrouped. There would be no other. Naruto. "What? I want to fight too. I can." Jiraiya swung his thumb across his hand and pressed it to the ground, making a huge pattern on the ground. "No, they're on an entirely different level. The enemy is like me, and he killed the Sandame. Only I can take him," Jiraiya said, summoning jutsu. Orochimaru and Kabuto were standing atop one of the 2 enormous snakes that the enemy had conjured up across the way. However, there was a tiny orange toad at Jiraiya's feet. "Sup?" Both Narutos were occupied with scowling at figures perched atop one of the snakes when Shizune brought up the subject of poison. Naruto quickly made the same hand seals and bit his own thumb before putting his hand down. Summoning jutsu. The real Naruto was eager to show off his abilities, but a yellow toad roughly the size of Jiraiya's sat there as the little cloud of smoke dissipated. "Hello." The 2 snakes lunged forward to attack while the toads squabbled over snacks. The group just managed to jump away in time, but when the real Naruto saw one of the snakes emerge from the dust raised by the attack, positioned to devour his memory self in midair, he went pale. All of a sudden, everything was dark. Inoichi and Naruto exchanged a quick look. Surely this was not the end. They heard something sliding against a damp surface and grunting sounds. Both mind walkers watched as Naruto slowly crawled out of the snake's mouth as a sudden crack of light appeared. At that, Inoichi couldn't help but smile. The snake followed, trapping his leg against the ground as Naruto felt the ground. The entire world appeared to become somewhat hazy, but he was able to extract his leg from beneath the snake's body. Tsunade and Kabuto suddenly came into focus. Even though she seemed healthy, she was unable to stop him from trying to subdue her with a barrage of kicks. Naruto scrambled to his feet and charged forward, using his own forehead protector to block a blow. With his hands free, Naruto swung them around, forming a glowing ball of energy between them. "Now I'll put an end to this," he said. He swung the screaming sphere at his opponent in a split second, but Kabuto ducked out of the way and swiped a hand along Naruto's leg as he went by. Naruto was unable to get to his feet, but he managed to get back up to his knees. "I managed to put a crack in your right femur with my snake attack. Even after that you're still moving, but you can't win. You can't even stand." Kabuto grumbled. If you want to grow up to become a true champion, it'd be best if you ran. What's with those eyes? If you die here, you'll never attain your dreams or anything else. However, I suppose if you can't run away, then you'll have to die. Naruto's memory wavered, but he was able to stand up. He steadied himself and gave Kabuto another glare, saying, "I'm not dead yet." The authentic Naruto flashed a ferocious smile. The two said, almost at the same time, "That is my way of the ninja." Naruto was thrown to the side by Kabuto's unexpected strike, but he groaned and got back up. Kabuto quickly made a single shadow clone, but he charged again with a kunai. "Tsunade. Bachan, remember the arrangements of that bet. Now you'll have to give me that bad luck amulet of yours," she said. "Naruto. Get out of the way. Run." Everything froze for a moment as they came to terms with what had happened, and there was a splash of blood. The blade had pierced right through the palm of Naruto's hand, which he had used to defend against the kunai in the memory. Naruto's hand clamped down on Kabuto's hand, but he wasn't finished. As the screaming energy reformed, the shadow clone swiftly waved its hands over the original Naruto's palm, saying, "Until I become Hokage, I refuse to die." Naruto swung the solid, looking ball of energy into Kabuto's chest as he made to back away, but he maintained his death grip on his hand. As he was thrown away, Kabuto screamed and pounded the earth with his body until he landed against a boulder. Naruto swayed where he was standing and coughed up some blood. The world darkened once more as he collapsed beside Tsunade. Inoichi and the real Naruto silently gazed into the darkness until the Mindscape made a comeback. Inoichi gave a contemplative nod after a moment. Naruto appears eager to see more, but Inoichi was far more aware of how exhausting these walks could be for the subject. "I think we've seen enough for today." The world appeared to disappear when he closed his eyes. When Inoichi stood up in front of the desk, Hiruzen Sarutobi, who was sitting at the window overlooking the village, asked, "Is Naruto-kun asleep?" "Yes, Hokage. Sama." The boy was exhausted once we left his Mindscape, but future trips should be easier on him. It takes time to safely acclimate. To face his Junin in the desk, Sarutobi slowly turned his chair. He appeared hesitant to pose the following query: "Is the fox involved?" While in his Mindscape, we had a brief encounter with the Kyuubi no Kitsune that suggested whatever happened was not directly related to any action taken by the beast. In response, Inoichi nodded. "Did you speak to it? What does the fox say?" If taken at its word, it was its first time dealing directly with Naruto. It was aware of what had happened to the boy, but insinuated that it was not involved. The amount of distance in Naruto's Mindscape between the prison seal and the incoming memories suggests it was telling the truth. Sarutobi gave a nod and took a short drag from his pipe. "You said incoming. Are memories still being fed to his mind?" Inoichi took a moment to think of what to say. "I wouldn't say that. I believe the memories came all at once, but his mind mostly shut down the piece of itself containing those memories. They're slowly leaking through the blockage to join the rest of his memories. Once the memories have leaked through, however, they are indistinguishable from his actual memories except for the impossibility of some of the events." The Hokage squinted his eyes. "Explain." "The new memories have a nearly identical signature as Naruto's own memories. In order for the signature to match so closely, they would have to be generated by someone who thinks almost exactly like Naruto, or manufactured by someone who knows the boy better than he knows himself. Given his history, the latter is highly unlikely. If the former, it would fall in line with how shadow clone memories are typically returned to the user, aside from the volume and the content." That's where Inoichi stopped. Giving a thorough report was one thing, but launching into a wild theory in front of the Hokage was quite another. Sarutobi sighed, sensing the hesitation. "Go ahead, tell me your theory." After blushing slightly, the Mindwalker composed himself. Sarutobi arched an eyebrow, but did nothing to stop him. "Time. Travel, Hokage. Sama. Not physically, mind you. This is still our Naruto. It may be possible that somehow, in the future, Naruto created a shadow clone that, when dispersed, sent the memories back to now instead of to the Naruto that created it. Assuming the implanted memories are actual memories, could they have been manufactured by putting the shadow clone through a genjutsu before dispersing it? Doubtful. The memory I viewed personally contained a great deal of information that would be very difficult to reproduce exactly without intimate knowledge of the village's history. If the memory was forged, the work was meticulous to the point of absurdity to trick someone as unknowledgeable as Naruto. Who would stand to gain? Possibly Tsunade, Sama. Though I can't imagine the motivation. The dream included mention of her taking over the position of Hokage. Sarutobi was leaning forward. This was a major point of contention. They would have to give Naruto a reason to switch his allegiance to someone else if the memories were intended to influence his loyalty. That individual would have to be Hokage given Naruto's personality, but Tsunade lacked the necessary abilities and up.to date village knowledge to carry out such an undertaking. However, it's best to consider that possibility. What about the inconsistencies? That's actually what makes me believe it. If you put this amount of work into building these memories, why would you get something so simple, so wrong? Iruka Amino alive, Naruto graduating the academy. Those inconsistencies are far too personal for Naruto to miss. If my theory is correct, then Naruto passing out due to mental strain that night may have directly or indirectly resulted in Iruka's death and the boy's failure to be placed on a team. It's not hard to imagine that if Naruto were to have saved his sensei's life, that he might be graduated as a reward. It would prove he was ready for the field. Can your theory be verified? I believe so. The changes thus far would still be localized. They're very important to Naruto, but insignificant to the greater world. We will need to investigate some of the information from memories that occur outside of Konoha. Very well. Compile everything we know regarding what has been referenced in Naruto's visions. I want a list of possible predictive events and any additional inconsistencies. In the meantime, I still want you to oversee Naruto's continued recovery. Inoichi gave a brisk nod of acknowledgement. Is there something else? Inoichi's throat cleared. When Naruto escaped the hospital, he was observed creating a partially complete Rasengan, though the boy appeared most surprised. The absorption of his future memories may be giving his subconscious more than just knowledge of future events. Sarutobi puffed on his pipe again and nodded. Another puff. His skill level will need to be assessed. Brief Naruto on the basics of your theory so that he doesn't worry himself too badly, but don't go into detail. I would like to hold off the possibility of him blaming himself further for his sensei's death. I'll have him released from the hospital and appoint a training supervisor. Thank you, Hokage. Sama. Naruto experienced conflict. It was wonderful to leave the hospital. Anything to avoid that malevolent ceiling was welcome. He also expressed his gratitude to Inoichi-san for elucidating his condition. It was really cool in the end. It was a lot to process all at once, though, and he had to swear he would never again pursue Mizuki. Teme. For a day like today, there was only one remedy. Hi, Ayame. Ni-chan, hey Naruto.kun. The attractive ramen waitress said with a radiant smile. If it isn't our favorite customer, where have you been lately? After saying, hi, Tucci. Gee, I was in the hospital, Naruto grimaced. Ayame was stirring a large pot of broth when she looked back up in alarm. Oh dear, what happened? Are you hurt? Naruto scratched the back of his neck and flushed. Inoichi-san had informed him that the memory material was classified, but he was kind enough to advise him on what to say in the event that someone inquired. It was nothing. Just an accident, and they kept me there to make sure I was okay. Well, at least I'm glad to hear that, so what will it be? 2 bowls of miso with pork, please, coming right up. Naruto was restless. He had been starved for too long, and while the hospital food wasn't all that horrible, it wasn't nearly as good as ramen. When he heard the curtain behind him swing open, he knelt down on his stool to see if he could gauge when he would be able to eat. He recognized the voice. Oh, it's Naruto. Baka, you still want to eat here? Too troublesome to find another spot. As Choji and Shikamaru entered, Naruto turned to see Ino holding the stall's curtain open. Naruto turned the stool to face his old classmates and twisted it to sit his butt back on the cushion. Even though he wasn't sure how Team 10 would perceive him at the moment, he couldn't help but think of them as his allies. Right now he was especially conscious of his bare forehead. Hey guys. How are you doing? Ino took a seat a few stools away from him and rolled her eyes. She turned away to examine the menu and said, I'm having lunch with my team, Naruto. Baka. Private team stuff, so don't butt in. Choji rolled his eyes melodramatically while sitting beside her on Naruto's side. Don't be like that, Ino. We're here to relax and get some nice food, right Shika? Troublesome. Still enrolled in school. He was the dead last at first, but now he was beneath that. Luckily, he felt at one with the world when a bowl of steaming miso and pork ramen was placed in front of him at that precise moment. Ayame glared at the blonde genin, but he missed it. Breaking his chopsticks, Naruto cried out, Itadaki. Masu, and started shoving the divine noodles into his mouth. The voices of Team 10 floated toward him from the other side of the counter. Ino's in particular, since she had never been very subtle. I'm fed up with these D-rank missions. Is Asuma Sensei going to have us babysitting forever? I heard Team 7 already left on a C rank. The majority of that was missed by Naruto. What's the rush, Ino? Finding out that Team 7 had left on a C rank chilled him for some reason. Has he been on a mission like that before? It was becoming increasingly annoying that he was unable to make the connections between the specifics of his new memories. The fear had sucked the last of Naruto's appetite away by the time he finished his first bowl. When Tucci noticed the expression on his face, he offered him an empty bowl that was ready to be filled, but Naruto shook his head. Leaning over the counter, he gave the boy a head pat. "Don't worry, Naruto-kun. The first bowl is on the house. Celebrating you getting out of the hospital." Naruto couldn't help but grin at the elderly man. There were certain things he could always rely on. Uncertain of his next move, he gave a gentle nod and opened the curtains to leave. He was only a few meters away from the stand when the Anbu in the cat mask materialized in front of him. The Anbu vanished in an instant after hearing the phrase, "Hokage. Sama requests your presence at training ground 6 in 10 minutes. That's the answer to that query. Mizuki entered the cave that concealed the outpost's entrance, exhausted and filthy. Even though he had assistants covering his trail, he could always feel the hounds of his old village following him. He might be able to sleep now. "Quite a mess you made." As Mizuki turned, she saw a silver-haired man push himself off the wall and approach. When he recognized the man as Kabuto Yakushi, his village contact, he only slightly relaxed. He tapped the big scroll fastened to his back and said, "Perhaps," but it was successful. Mizuki felt a chill go up her spine as the dead voice said, "You broke cover without authorization." He forced himself not to grab his kunai pouch. He couldn't fight against this man and survive. Apparently amused by his nervousness, he strolled slowly around the recent missing nin, saying, "Still, it would be a shame to punish such opportunism with death. Perhaps something else." The scroll. It has the Shikifuan in it. I made sure. I thought Orochimaru Sama was looking for it. "You thought?" Kabuto asked, squinting his torn eyes as he reduced the distance to face the quivering X.spy. His carefree grin gradually reappeared, as though the anger had never been there. Mizuki was afraid of the way the man controlled himself. He always felt like a cat toy when he spoke to him, and you never really knew what he was thinking. "Perhaps you're right." Kabuto caught the scroll as he passed by and cut the strap that held it to Mizuki's back with a flick of his wrist. He never drew the weapon in front of Mizuki. As if it didn't exist, Kabuto approached a stone face and said, "Report to the lab tomorrow at sunup. Your payment will be waiting for you." Mizuki prayed that a kunai wasn't waiting for him on the other side of the genjutsu as she followed him to the outpost entrance. He entered a lengthy hallway that was devoid of anyone in sight. As soon as the adrenaline wore off, Mizuki slumped in place and walked silently to the barracks. It was eerily quiet on the training field. Long mornings waiting for Kakashi Sensei to arrive were something Naruto couldn't help but remember, but this felt different. However, it's not as if he had actually gone through those memories, so perhaps this is how they would have felt as well. With a sigh, Naruto glanced around. Were all ninjas inherently tardy? His expectations weren't exactly met by that. He knew how to play the waiting game, so whatever. In the shade of a nearby tree, he placed a hand on the ground and spread his body out flat. It was safe to say that white ceiling panels were not nearly as visually pleasing as clouds. He was startled awake by a series of soft cracks. Even though they were subtle, he was loud enough that he was certain he hadn't imagined them because his ear was so close to the ground. A louder crack just below him sent a rush of adrenaline through his body as he used all the leverage he could muster to push off the ground. The ground beneath him erupted with several large tree roots as he sailed into the air, writhing about as though frustrated. It didn't take a genius to see that he was in danger as he retreated toward the snatching tendrils. Before he was destroyed, he swiftly conjured up two shadow clones that pushed and twisted the original to the side. Naruto made a brief contact with the ground before leaping once more to dodge another set of roots that were emerging from below. The ground felt stable when he landed this time, so he made an effort to reorganize. Well, he had certainly been a simple target. His fault. Though that was for later, he wasn't so arrogant as to believe that luck hadn't played a role. By whom was he being attacked? Naruto barely noticed the shift in the tendrils' behavior as he combed through the shrubs on either side of the clearing. Both writhing masses leaned in his direction and blasted out, growing longer without showing any signs of stopping. He wouldn't trade a fireball for anything. Naruto quickly made up his mind and put his hands in a familiar position. Shadow Clone Jutsu. Suddenly, a dozen blonde clones appeared and swiftly dispersed in all directions. Unfortunately, the tendril masses spread out like a wheel's spokes and pursued each clone, seemingly unabated. Since the roots were no longer bound together, a couple of clones took out kunai and tried to cut them, but they were eliminated before they could cut all the way through. The original hesitated in horror almost a moment too long when he saw the flash of a root piercing his stomach, but one of the surviving clones was able to replace him before the vines ensnared him and sucked the life from him. He cannot simply keep escaping, he had to track down the person responsible. Naruto watched sourly as the roots twisted together once more and came toward him as a single, solid mass as the final clone burst. For the second time, he felt an instinct and let his muscles take precedence over his thoughts. He began gathering chakra into the palm of his hand after creating a single shadow clone. Amidst a shrieking whine, the clone raked its hands across the air over his palm as a spinning ball of chakra materialized and grew to the size of a melon. Naruto pushed the ball of energy toward the center in the hopes that it would work, and the tendrils closed the remaining gap. Rasengan. What is Rasen? As the ball struck the roots, a tremendous grinding sound burst forth. Naruto leaned into the point of contact and was pushed back for a few seconds. The mass pushed forward while fragments of roots flew outward. Naruto watched in horror as the whirling ball of energy shrank in size. He tried to leap away at the last second, but 3 of his limbs were caught by tendrils that swung out. Hope was briefly raised by the partial capture before his other arm was also taken. He was forced to look up at the clouds once more as the roots slammed him into the earth. Naruto moaned as the roots tugged at his limbs, almost causing his hips and shoulders to dislocate. Was this it? In his past or future recollections, he had lost, but never without recognizing the opponent. But at least he was still alive, even though he wasn't sure what he could do. It wasn't until he opened his eyes to see a man standing over him with a blank expression that he realized his eyes had been closed. He had a metal flame around his face that was attached to his hite, and he was dressed as a Konoha Junin. Is that it? The man with the dead voice asked a question that Naruto was unable to fully understand. He was so tightly bound that he was unable to even pull against them. Even though his fingers were loose, they were only able to wriggle around. Naruto responded with a growl. He spat at the man out of frustration, but fortunately, from where he was on the ground, the saliva fell back and did not strike his face. He had woken up to more than that, but there was now a trail of saliva coming from the corner of his mouth. Who are you? Naruto's voice felt steady, though a little hoarse from effort. He shivered at the deadness in the man's voice as he asked, "Why aren't you fighting back?" Naruto became terrified when the man's face abruptly took on the appearance of a heartless murderer. What do you mean? The man took a kunai out of his holster and knelt down to place it at Naruto's throat, saying, "Why are you holding back? If you don't fight me, then I will kill you." But what about his memories of the future? If he was going to die, how could he have memories of the future? How could he? His brain was forced to process a burst of red eyes. The Kyuubi. It might be useful to me. He recalled observing the beast while standing in his Mindscape. Waves of fear rolled off Inoichi. Sensei. He is unable to use the Kyuubi. He remained in Konoha. In the village, he was unable to release the Kyuubi. The man must be after that, he would be the first to pass away. When Naruto attempted to swallow, the kunai's tip slightly compressed his neck, immobilizing him in the middle of his autonomous movement. His limbs stopped trembling as he looked at the man above him, despite the cold sweat on his forehead. He didn't mean it, but his voice sounded more like a whimper than he would have liked. "I won't do it. You can't make me." After giving him a long look, the man returned the kunai to his pouch. The roots let go and slithered back underground in a blur of hand seals too fast to follow. The man merely took a few steps back and placed his hands on Naruto's hips, but Naruto stared back as he curled up with his abused limbs. Who are you? My name is Tenzo. Naruto continued when it didn't seem like the man would go into further detail. Uncertain, he trailed off, "Why would you want me to fight you with the If you had tried to release your burden, I would have stopped you. I wanted to know if you would try. Why did you not try? Did you know I wasn't going to kill you?" Naruto blinked. Exhaustion and indignation fought inside him as the adrenaline left his system. What were you thinking? You can't kill it, someone could have been. So you believed I was going to kill you. Why would you not use your burden to protect yourself? His consciousness gradually began to register the events that had just transpired. Tenzo wanted to know if he would defend himself by releasing the Kyuubi. He was too exhausted to shout, but the words he knew made him feel much better. I'm going to be Hokage. The Hokage has to protect the village, Daibao. The positive vibe vanished when someone asked, "Could you not protect the village better if you were alive?" He recalled looking at Kakashi Sensei, who was imprisoned in a water prison by a formidable missing nin. In the Forest of Death, he recalled seeing a huge snake ready to devour Sasuke. Teme. He recalled that the Kyuubi had been stopped by the Yondaime's death. Naruto answered in a weary tone, "You can't always have both." For a brief moment, The man's lifeless face lit up with a melancholy smile, revealing a different side of Naruto than the grim face he had previously seen. As Tenzo lifted Naruto off the ground, he said, "Well, let's hope it doesn't come to that." As Tenzo's face gradually returned to his murderous scary face throughout the critique, it did so abruptly again when he finished. "Your situational awareness is pathetic. You sensed that something was wrong and dismissed it. You were saved by reflexes and luck. I understand that it may take some time for you to integrate what you know with what you do, but habits make the difference between life and death. I will be ambushing you whenever I feel like it until I'm unable to take you unaware." A drop of perspiration trickled down Naruto's cheek. Yes, Tenzo. Sensei. Naruto wasn't quite sure what to make of this smile, but he was beginning to recognize a pattern with the frightful Junin. "Good, now let's take a look at your taijutsu." The chair in front of the Hokage's desk had Danzo Shimura's good hand resting on its back. Slow development is one thing, here isn't. With the latest incident, it appears that the Jinchuriki may suffer instability as well. The Hokage let out a puff of smoke and responded, "The extent of any apparent instability is being assessed as we speak. I'm not convinced that the episode constitutes any lasting damage. If anything, Mizuki's involvement will make training the boy in trust assessment easier. The best trust assessment depends entirely on command structure. You've always allowed your ninja to rely too heavily on their own understanding of a given situation. Soldiers cannot make informed decisions in the field when intelligence is, for good reason, restricted above their pay grade. I have an excellent track record for turning unstable elements into useful tools, and I can do the same for what is supposed to be our greatest weapon. One that is quickly becoming an enormous liability." With a sigh, Sarutobi looked out the window. "You know why I won't agree to that, my friend?" Sarutobi seemed to be thinking for a moment as they were silent. "Based on the assessment being conducted, I expect Naruto to show himself capable of joining the shinobi force. Will it relieve some of your worry if I allowed you to designate one of his teammates in such a case?" As Danzo bowed, Sarutobi couldn't help but observe that whenever his former teammate got his way, the address changed. "It will, Hokage. Sama." The man simply had no idea how to put the game down. Danzo closed the door behind him as he moved slowly through it. A flash of movement signaled the arrival of an Anbu at the counselor's location as the door clicked shut. Sarutobi reclined. "Report." Years seemed to meld off the old man's face, but the cat mask made it impossible to read anything other than the monotone voice. Uzumaki shows a strong hesitation to make use of his burden's power. I am certain he considered the situation life or death and intended to die without releasing the Kyuubi. Tenzo went on. His taijutsu is clearly structured, though I don't recognize the style. However, he seems somewhat lost in any prolonged engagement, as if he doesn't remember why he did certain things. His ninjutsu is limited in number, but the combination of the shadow clone and assisted Rasengan techniques make him a force to be reckoned with. His uses the clones in replacement to control the battlefield much better than you would expect from someone who relies on close range. Here he stopped. He appears to have memories of having a summoning contract. I managed to prevent him from completing the hand seals for the technique. As he was unable to immediately identify the summons he was going to call on, I assume it's a contract he has not yet signed. Sarutobi gave a tentative nod. Looks like that was a close call. The results of using the technique without a contract may be unpredictable. The results could have destroyed a normal ninja, but with his excess chakra, it could have taken him somewhere, just as it had Jiraiya. Where, though? Ignore it. Kanai ducked. Continue. Tenzo gave a nod. No evident genjutsu abilities, though he has been trained on detecting and dispelling simple genjutsus. A more advanced practitioner would need to be arranged for a more thorough test. He showed some familiarity with seals, but little interest. That made the difference. The boy had undoubtedly been trained by Jiraiya. Few people remained who would have attempted to impose sealing knowledge on an unwilling student, despite the fact that the Rasengan was a powerful hint. Jiraiya wouldn't have let a boy with his heritage go without trying, but it was hard enough dealing with an enthusiastic student. Conclusion: with a few weeks of mentoring and time to acclimate to his situation, I believe he would make for good Chunin material. Possibly special Junin if he hasn't shown his full ability yet. The Hokage reclined in his seat. Make it so. Train Naruto-kun for the next couple weeks, but do it out of sight. No need to limit the training to what he remembers, daily reports. After saying, "Yes, Hokage, Sama," the Anbu vanished. Naruto leaned into the door, and it opened with a start. He hadn't slept in his apartment for a long time, but it was good to be back. Well, except that the smell of dishes in the sink reminds you of the mess. His pants were already around his ankles when he staggered into the bedroom, too tired to give a damn. He hurriedly stripped the jacket and shirt together, fell onto the bed, and partially wrapped the blankets around himself after a kick through the pants into the closet door. The eyes of Sharingan gazed back at him. "Come, Naruto. Then I will break that bond." Naruto stood tall on the vertical surface of a rocky cliff wall, panting heavily. "Break them. Then why? Now, your headband." He was interrupted by Sasuke. The new missing nin's mouth curled into a smirk as he said, "I will acknowledge that you are strong. You know the same pain of loneliness that I do, and that makes a person stronger. Because of that, by severing these bonds I will grow even stronger. We will fight as equals, but you won't be able to scratch my forehead. That much hasn't changed." "No matter what you say, it's useless, Sasuke," Naruto shot back, his fists clenched at his sides. "Enough talk. Let's fight." Anger fueled Naruto's power as he charged with amazing speed. The Uchiha skillfully sidestepped the haymaker he threw. Sasuke stopped Naruto's charge with a cross to his cheek following the first two misses. Naruto plummeted to the water. He launched himself out of the water using chakra, only to be kicked in the back. A voice in the back of Naruto's mind laughed as he struggled in the water, feeling liquid fire pouring into his veins. He became aware that everything appeared hazy as he landed on the water's surface, as though he had no idea what he was seeing. The details became even more hazy as he prepared to charge, until nothing was left. He jolted to his feet, drenched in perspiration. He had returned to his bedroom, where the blankets he had wrapped around himself while he slept had almost mummified him. He was lying on his back, gasping for air, and looking up without seeing. No, it wasn't a fantasy. It was true. It wasn't phony or nonsense, but it hadn't happened yet. Another memory. All of them were recollections. Why? Why does he recall something that hasn't happened and most likely won't? Tears jumped to the corners of Naruto's eyes, and he growled to himself. He rolled onto his side and attempted to fall asleep once more. Can he do anything else? Knock, knock, dear, can you get the door? I'm working in the kitchen. Get off your lazy butt and handle it. Down the hallway of the cozy house, there was a moaning sound. What was that? I said I love you, dear. I love you too. Now get the door. A man with a bruised brow walked to the door and said, Yes, dear. Oh, good morning, Naruto-san. I believe our next appointment was scheduled for this afternoon. Did something happen? Naruto felt much more confident going to the door than he did now that he could see the family home beyond the entrance. Kind of, sir. Heirlooms on a small shelf down the hall, family photos on the wall. When Inoichi hesitated and led the boy into his office, he abruptly moved aside and was ready to usher him into the living room. With a reassuring smile on his face, he turned around after closing the door and used the palm of his hand to activate a seal on the wall. So what seems to have upset you, Naruto-san? Naruto was sitting on a wooden chair that was firm but cozy. He gazed for a moment at the bulletin boards that covered every inch of the wall, strewn with pictures and documents that he couldn't understand. I had a bad dream. He quickly corrected himself after realizing how pitiful that sounded. I mean, it wasn't a dream, it was a memory, I think. Slow down. I know it was a lot to take in during our first appointment, but this is what we talked about. What about this last memory was different? Still tense, the boy sank back into the chair. Sasuke was leaving the village. We fought and something happened. Leaving? Leaving how? Leaving for good, I think. I was trying to bring him back, but he wouldn't come willingly. I tracked him down in this valley, and we fought until I got so angry I blacked out. Inoichi leaned down to be on Naruto's level because she didn't like the direction this was taking. Do you remember when this happened? No, not really. It always feels like now when it's happening. I have trouble figuring out which memories happened first. Like I'm missing pieces to put it together. Context. Yeah, that. Naruto waited anxiously while the man leaned back for a while. Inoichi came across as very personable, but it was hard to tell if he would be taken seriously at any given moment. If he hadn't gone, he would have taken this to Iruka first. Naruto brightened and said, Naruto-san. Naruto nodded inquisitively. Have you ever heard the theory that your life flashes before your eyes right before you die? How is this related to anything? Well, I know a technique that does something very similar. It might help you get your memories in order, but it can be somewhat painful. Does that sound like something you want to do? He remembered that last night he had fallen back asleep with salt dripping down his face. To separate his eyelids, he had to wash his face. He gave the Junin a serious nod. I'll do whatever it takes. Inoichi got up and ushered Naruto to a short, padded table, saying, Then so will I. A few hours later, Naruto exited the small clan compound and the Yamanaka's front door. He sensed that he was on high alert and took deliberate steps. Inoichi had ensured that Naruto was aware that the process was not finished when they had finally finished it. But now his mind felt so much clearer. The Chunin exam came back to him. The altercation with Orochimaru, if you can call it that. He had a much more positive memory of his battle with Neji. The invasion. He gave as much information as he could about everything he could recall as the pieces came together, and Inoichi took thorough notes. Halfway through, Mrs. Yamanaka stopped to serve lunch and then again to inform Tenzo that he would have to miss the day's training. Inoichi appeared eager to depart with his notepad when they were too exhausted to proceed, telling Naruto to return home and wait for a summons from the Hokage. Naruto was thinking of something else. When they ran from the hospital, he recalled how quickly Tenzo had caught up to him. He made 2 shadow clones after arriving at his apartment and gathering all of his equipment. Until the summons came, one was to remain in the apartment. The other was to take a stroll around the community. Hopefully, that would provide him with the necessary window of opportunity. He wore more muted colors than his typical orange and waited 10 minutes after the first clone had left before sneaking out his bedroom window. Being predictable had its benefits. In the aftermath of the invasion, the village walls were far less secure than he recalled. He used a number of strategies he had picked up from Ero Sennin to get past the gate outpost. He slipped out of the brush and jumped into the trees as soon as he was out of earshot. Team 7 had already departed on their first C-rank mission, according to Ino. Had Zabuza already ambushed them? Despite his strength, Sasuke was unable to stop Haku. He had to know. He would not allow his team to perish. Not after Iruka. A bridge needed to be saved. Team 7 and Tazuna jumped to the ground as a huge blade whirled over their heads and lodged itself in the tree in front of them, yelling, "Everyone, get down." Kakashi was the first to break the abrupt silence as Team 7 stood back up, saying, well, if it isn't the hidden mists missing. Nin Momochi Zabuza. Sakura was trembling uncontrollably. As the surrounding mist grew heavier, it seemed as though the entire world was falling on her shoulders. It seemed as though every bush might be hiding something frightful. Something lethal. When I go out of the village for the first time, will I die? That wasn't fair at all. I wasn't prepared for this by them. Something touched her neck lightly, like a blade spilling her life into the ground. Her hair was slipping against her clammy skin when she jolted and reached up with her free hand to touch the spot. 8 choices. Sakura was startled out of her reverie by the words. She had no idea which way to turn because the voice had seemed to come from everywhere at once in the mist. He was a master of silent killing, according to Kakashi. Sensei. Was this his intention? This is frightful. Someone please stop him. Liver, lungs, spine, clavicle vein, jugular, brain, kidneys, heart. Which one should I go after? She asked, her eyes refusing to break through the suffocating white blanket that surrounded them. The voice grew more sinister. As an unseen force reached through her chest and squeezed her heart into silence, the pressure she had previously experienced abruptly vanished from her memory. She only needed to wait for the final blow to land. Sakura couldn't figure out how Kakashi Sensei could sound so composed. Don't worry. He turned to face them until she could see the smile beneath his mask, saying, I'll protect you guys even if it kills me. I don't let my comrades die. After a brief moment of inarticulate appreciation, she sensed a movement behind her. We'll see about that. She heard the voice coming from exactly the same place this time. How could he have gotten between us? With a kunai buried in his back, Sakura saw her sensei behind the frightful missing Nin as she frantically dove out of the way. The man appeared behind Kakashi, already swinging the enormous cleaver, and then abruptly burst into a shower of water. Sakura witnessed Kakashi being torn in two for the second time during this mission, but fortunately, she was able to witness her sensei's body exploding as well. With the kunai pressed to Zabuza's neck, Kakashi Sensei commanded from behind, don't move. It's over. Sakura felt a wave of relief as the buzzing in her head from her blood pumping began to lessen. Another Zabuza emerged behind Kakashi as the captive scattered into the water in a heartbreaking turn. Zabuza dug the tip of the sword into the ground and used the leverage to kick Kakashi across the clearing into the nearby water, just as he was about to fold into the ground to avoid the sword's sweep. Zabuza closed in on Kakashi as he exploded back to the surface. Sakura saw the panic on her sensei's face as the water rose up around him, encasing and suspending him in a ball of water. Water prison no jutsu, she exclaimed. Zabuza summoned another water clone to attack them while their sensei was trapped, but fear overcame her shock. Straight from the water's surface, the water clone rose to its feet. The clone abruptly darted into motion and kicked Sasuke in the chest, sending him flying backward with blood splattering from his mouth as he hit the ground. He. Wearing those Hite.8 and acting like ninjas. You are not ninjas. Sakura noticed the same fear on her teammate's face as she looked at Hibachi. Despite being the strongest member of Team 7, Sasuke was obviously outclassed. Kakashi yelled from his prison, "Take Tazuna and run!" But the sound was muffled by the water prison. A tense silence fell as Sasuke stood up and the genin considered their options. He can't move as long as he's trapping me and his clone can't go very far from his body. Just run away now, this was said. Hibachi suddenly threw 2 eggs at the missing nin and screamed something incomprehensible. He attempted to use those as poison gas bombs during the bell test, but wait, no, as the water clone swatted the eggshells from the air. Sakura caught Tazuna by the wrist and yanked him away. Even Zabuza was momentarily taken aback by the sudden eruption of purple gas, as if he had been expecting some sort of explosive tool. With a curse, Sasuke withdrew, but the gas surged forward, trapping Kakashi and the missing nin. In an attempt to stop friendly fire, Kakashi made Hibachi explain his poison gas attack to the team after the test. Although the eggshells were simple enough to resemble typical smoke bombs, his family had a method for forcing gas into a liquid state that allowed them to fit enormous amounts of gas into small areas. She suspected Hibachi would receive another reprimand if they survived this, but she didn't give it much thought as she ducked around trees and dragged the bridge builder along with her. After running for a few minutes with no sign of pursuit, they stopped, and Sasuke grabbed Hibachi by the collar and gave him a knee to the stomach before making his way to a tree to rest and lean against. Hibachi squatted on his hands and knees and vomited a little. When a shape landed in the center of the team, Sakura gasped, but her shock was short-lived because it turned out to be an irate Kakashi, until he heaved a sickening cough and rolled over. After a brief moment of hesitation, he accepted Sakura's offer of support and waved the team forward. With trepidation, Tazuna trailed behind, content that the boy was absorbing some of the rage that had been aimed at him. When Naruto reached a dock along the shore, he anxiously glanced across the channel that divided the land of fire from the land of wave. Even from this distance, he could see that the far bank was still partially obscured by fog, but he was unable to determine whether this was due to the fog or the fact that he had arrived too late. Leaning forward, he placed his sandaled foot carefully on the water's surface to ensure he could still perform this part. When he didn't sink, he smiled. Retraining his body to do exactly what he wanted it to took a moment, but a few minutes later he was running across the water. "Be alive, please." As he leapt from the crest of one wave to the next, water sprayed everywhere. Is this hell? I can't even defend my beloved people anymore, as if things weren't already terrible enough. Please allow me to arrive on time if Kami has any mercy. Before he knew he had traveled the full distance, his foot slapped against a rock, and he looked around, kicking himself for not seeing. There was no time for negligence now. Although hopping from tree to tree was somewhat of a shortcut, he recalled that the path to Tazuna's house was much longer. He located the pond where he recalled meeting Haku and Zabuza for the first time. There were no bodies, but there was undoubtedly a fight. Were they able to escape? Although there wasn't much blood, the clearings surrounding grass and shrubs appeared to be extremely unhealthy brown. What took place? A glimmer of light drew his attention as his frustration with the circumstances increased. A Hide.8 from Konoha? He picked it up and wiped the steel surface with some of the mud. Correct. It's time to find out. He jumped back into the trees and headed for Tazuna's house without thinking again. He realized what he had done when he finally saw the house a few minutes later. Most likely, Team 7 was inside that house on a mission. He wasn't a member of Team 7. Reaching up, he adjusted the goggles on his forehead, as if to remind himself of the flimsy excuse he'd used as he'd slipped out of the village. It's not desertion if you're not a ninja. Correct? There was a nagging suspicion that Gigi would not see it quite that way. Naruto considered his options while concentrating on the current task. He might be told to return to the village if Kakashi Sensei discovered he was here. He could probably disregard the order because, once more, he is not a ninja, but it's not like he didn't intend to become one. It's not the best way to begin again. After all, he still desired to become a Chunin. Naruto chose to send a transformed shadow clone first to see what was different, reasoning that he could deal with that later, to confirm their survival. He summoned a shadow clone and made the familiar cross hand seal. Before long, the clone changed into a tiny dog and trotted to the bridge, builder's house. The dog scampered around sniffing at anything that caught his attention before heading to the bottom of a window that was open to let in the refreshing evening breeze. He climbed up onto a nearby firewood pile and took a nap. Now that the adrenaline rush had subsided, Sakura was furious. Sensei ordered you not to use poisons above your level. Where do you even get something like that? She asked. From my dad's supplies, plus, I got Kakashi Sensei out of that water trap thing. I didn't see you trying anything, Hibachi argued. You got Sensei poisoned. We don't know if Zabuza was affected at all, now that Kakashi-sensei is asleep in the other room. Who's to stop him from finishing us off? At that, Hibachi went a little pale. He let himself feel pretty proud of what he had accomplished when he first sat down on Tazuna's couch. It sounded as though he had only postponed the inevitable. Even the medical ninjutsu that could help Kakashi-sensei rid his body of the poison was unknown to them. Sakura gave in, if only because she was becoming more and more afraid. Sasuke was meditating when she tried to comfort him. Sasuke-kun, where's your Hite-8? After giving her a quick glance, Sasuke touched his bare forehead with his hand while his glower was barely disturbed. He just shrugged, not finding what he was looking for. I wish I had Sasuke-kun's level of composure. Perhaps he will be able to rescue us from this situation. Without interference from Hibachi. Baka. Sakura looked at her other teammate, who was now pouting. How did I end up with him? She let out a mental sigh. She had a thought that seemed to lift her spirits. It might have been worse. Naruto. Baka might have been the one. She trembled. Suddenly, Sasuke gets up and moves toward the door. I'll trap the perimeter. Yes, exactly, we'll be saved by Sasuke-kun. The clone of Naruto kept wandering around the village. He had missed his second appointment with Inoichi-san, which was set for this afternoon. The man would quickly learn that he was not a real person, after all. To be honest, he had been shocked that no one had discovered him the previous evening. When they were certain the boss had left, the itinerant clone returned to the apartment and dispelled to let him know everything was okay. He was merely playing for time now. When he turned a corner and bumped into someone else, his train of thought suddenly stopped. Gee Gamanasai. The clone put himself right. This only made the clone more agitated. Hinata-chan. Oh, don't apologize, that was all my fault. The heiress's face flushed. Was she truly offended by me? If I offend the boss, she will be furious. Hinata hesitated, tilted her head, and leaned forward as she nervously pressed her fingers together. Something didn't feel right. Unsure of how to react, the Naruto clone leaned back slightly. Uzumaki Naruto. The clone slowly turned to face the new figure, already feeling uneasy. Anbu? Oh, I see. Why would Anbu care? Unable to become sidetracked. The Hokage would like to see you in his office. The clone gave a firm nod. And bided their time. He jerked his chin toward the Hyuga heiress, and he could swear that this time it was the Anbu, not Tenzo, rolling his eyes behind his mask. Oh, yeah, sorry Hinata-chan. Guess I have to get going. I'll see you later, right? Hinata appeared almost as perplexed as he was. With his hand on the clone's shoulders, the Anbu triggered a body flicker and said, That's fine, N Naruto-kun. Later. Thinking back on how she had handled that, Hinata drooped, but she was cheered by Naruto's use of honorifics. However, why was his chakra so strange? As the two leapt to the base of the Hokage tower, the almost instantaneous change in momentum almost made him sick to his stomach. He was then led at his own pace up the stairs. All he could hope was that this conversation would be as polite as the rest. The Anbu made a single knock on the door of the Hokage's office before disappearing. Tenzo and Inoichi were seated in the reasonably comfortable visitor chairs, and the door opened smoothly to reveal the Hokage behind his desk. Hiruzen gave a pleasant smile. The older man pointed to the final chair in front of the desk and said, How are you doing, Naruto-kun? Please, have a seat. Uncomfortably, the Naruto clone walked over to the chair and sat down, mentally cursing that he had never learned to make a poker face. We're here to make you an offie. After a brief pause, the Hokage reached up and squeezed the bridge of his nose. Naruto, did you send a shadow clone to meet with your Hokage? Lying here would only make things more difficult, but the temptation was too great for a child. Yes? Where is the real you? Hiruzen added, flicking ashes from his pipe. Well, you see, Hiruzen interrupted him by raising the palm of his free hand. Naruto. Where is the real you? With an audible gulp, the clone told everyone that he knew he was doing something wrong. Wave. Hiruzen leaned forward at this, asking, Excuse me? Naruto rarely had the opportunity to witness genuine danger emanating from his Jiji. He was a very intimidating man when he felt like it. Elaborate. You see, Inoichi-san helped me fix my memory, so now I remember all about my first C-rank mission. The one to escort the bridge builder to Wave. Except this time I'm not on Team 7, so I had to go save them from Zabuza. Zabuza Momochi? Inoichi broke the silence this time. Hiruzen raised an eyebrow as Inoichi clarified. The Wave mission was the first memory episode that Naruto described to me. That was before we were sure what they were. Zabuza Momochi is an A-rank missing. Nin from Kiri. Attempted to assassinate the Mizukage. Hiruzen gave a firm nod. Why didn't you discuss this with me before you left the village? Naruto reddened. He knew the best lies were half truths, but even he acknowledged that one was fairly obvious. Well, Inoichi seemed so interested in the memories of the Chunin exam, I thought you might forget. Hiruzen just returned the stare. I wanted to save Team 7, but I also wanted to save Haku. And maybe Zabuza too. There's no reason why we have to fight them. They got hired by a scumbag, that's all. The guy doesn't even plan to pay them. No one needs to die, right? Naruto's voice had increased in volume until the very end. He was ashamed of the childish way it came out, but there was no turning back now. The two Junin looked on as the Hokage steepled his fingers in front of him. Naruto, I need you to understand. As you are currently not a registered Konoha ninja, I will not punish you directly for this action. When you return, you will be receiving your Hite.8, and doing this again will have severe consequences, understood? The clone gave a submissive nod. We will discuss the rest when you return, but your primary mission now is to return to us safely, agreed? The replica paused. But, what about? I will send reinforcements, who will handle the situation as they must. Not everyone can be saved. Will you try? The innocence had vanished. Over a pair of missing. Nin that Naruto had previously encountered, his back was against the wall. In his place, Hiruzen couldn't help but notice an older blonde. Hiruzen reached over to where Naruto had laid his hands flat on his desk and covered the boys with his older hand, saying, yes. If it can be done, we will try. The Hokage then directed chakra into the shadow clone, disrupting its shell and causing it to dispel. Now go back to your master and tell him to be safe. Naruto was stunned as he landed on the next branch after memories collided with him. He thrashed around, slapping a hand against the tree's trunk to prevent himself from falling. Retrieving memories from clones he had left for so long was never easy. Gigi's reaction was both very satisfying and eerie. He felt as though he had passed one test but failed another. More significantly, though, the clone was unaware of his knowledge. Zabuza had already launched an attack, and this time Haku saved him before Kakashi beat him. He might be completely well and prepared to strike at any moment. He must have been exposed to some of Hibachi's poison, though probably not as much as Kakashi-sensei, because he hadn't already attacked again. Haku was somewhat of a medic, wasn't he? He was sure of the last time he saw the ice ninja gathering herbs. They will be defeated if Zabuza launches an attack while Kakashi is still out of it. He couldn't let his guard down for a moment, but could he defeat the mist demon even if he was prepared? He was once told by Kakashi-sensei that being a ninja meant knowing when to confront someone and when to turn around. He had to do something, even though he wasn't very good at it. Gato. The scum with the fat wallet was the enemy's weak spot. Zabuza would have no motive to kill Tazuna if he could demonstrate to them that Gato would not be paying him. In the crowded woods, Naruto gathered himself and leapt to the next perch. He couldn't just sit back and hope that things would work out. He hoped that the clones he left guarding Tazuna's house would be sufficient. He could not allow Iruka to occur once more. The sheer number of guards only seemed to make them more reckless. Naruto crept into the alleyway that separated the compound's tallest building from a warehouse. Even though it's only 3 stories, Gato didn't seem like the type of person who would choose to live in such a small building. Naruto glanced at both ends of the alley, then planted a foot on the wall of the taller building and cautiously made his way up the side toward the upper floors. The largest window, which was also on the building's front face, was probably the most significant. There's too much chance of being noticed. He finally reached a small window that appeared promising. He was reminded of the night he stole the forbidden scroll by the entire experience. He worked quickly on the basic window lock, using his kunai to scrape the grout away from the frame and dislodge it. He knew something wasn't right as he slipped into what looked like a tiny bedroom, but there are different levels of wrong, and this one felt like the skin melting off. A stabbing pain in his neck accompanied the soft voice, "You're not who I expected. I apologize." Naruto instinctively called forth the chakra to make a shadow clone, but for some reason, it failed. The numbness that was creeping through his body didn't register until he realized he was lying on the ground. But I'd rather not go to sleep. The steel at his ankles and wrists didn't help him feel any better, and the light was blinding. Lying on a steel table, Mizuki swallowed uneasily as he tried to figure out what Kabuto was doing across the room at the counter. Without looking at his patient, Kabuto said, "You should be aware that this gift is only given to those that have shown themselves to be valuable to Orochimaru. Some people simply enjoy hearing themselves speak, but Mizuki knew better than to take anything said to him here at face value. Whether the gift accepts you, however, is another question. It can be picky." Kabuto laughed piteously. Abruptly, Kabuto appeared at the edge of the table, holding a big syringe and grinning inappropriately. This was power, Mizuki reminded himself. I'm as curious as you to know whether or not you'll pass the test. The ability to live was contained in that needle. The ability to continue living. Living to see tomorrow was the most important thing, and he needed to be useful in order to do that. As the needle pierced the skin at the base of his neck, he forced himself to ignore the sharp pain. It's not that bad. It didn't begin that way, at least. Before the actual pain struck, the needle had been removed and stored somewhere. He thrashed against the restraints, howling in pain as his bones seemed to try to twist their way out of his body. The fire crawling over his body was the only thing in the world. Soon after, in a rare act of cosmic benevolence, numb unconsciousness ensued.
That's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this great story. See you in the next one.